Um, Today we've got a lot of cool topics. So we're going to go ahead and start off with doing a component dynamic reloading demo. Do another demo from Mukundan on CLI developer experience for K8s, and then Oli is going to debug Dapr apps with Docker Compose. And then we'll round out with community show and tell and open discussion. So let's go ahead and kick it off with Josh. Do you want to go ahead and share your screen and show us the dynamic reloading?
Awesome. Yeah, sure thing. I think I need you to stop first. Yep. Great. And let me know when you can see the slideshow.
We can see.
Awesome. Cool. So hi everyone, I'm Josh. I'm a developer on Dapr. I work for Diagrid, and I've been working on this new feature that's going to be in preview, and it's pinned for 1.12 at the moment, and it's called component dynamic reloading. You may also kind of see it referred to hot reloading. That's how we're kind of naming it in Dapr. And this has been a highly requested feature in Dapr for quite some time. And if you're a user of Dapr, I'm sure you're aware that when you run Dapr, either in kind of self-hosted mode or in Kubernetes, Dapr is going to kind of load in all the components and configurations and such, and it's going to use that set of configuration for its entire life cycle and until Dapr is terminated and restarted or what have you. So it's been a long-running feature request that it would actually watch for the changes to that configuration during its life cycle and dynamically reload itself to the kind of latest state of the world, as it were. So in the past few months, we've been making changes in Dapr internally to try and change the way we're kind of loading components and closing them down to finally get the end result, which again we're kind of preview featuring for 1.12 to have this kind of dynamic loading behavior. So what this means in practice is that you would enable this preview feature like you would any other. So you add the configuration, and this one is called hot reloading, and that will get referenced by your Dapr either in self-hosted or in Kubernetes. It loads its configuration like normal and inits all of the components and such. But the difference now would be that if, say, I change a component on file that Dapr is looking at a self-hosted mode, or indeed I change a resource in Kubernetes, through kubectl edit or kubectl apply, what have you, it's actually then going to act on those changes. So to give you an example of what that might look like in practice, so I've got a component here. Let's say that we're working in self-hosted mode at the moment. I've got this kind of stored in a file that I've got Dapr pointing to read from. And I want to change the host that this state store, in this case it's a Redis state store. I want to change which host it's pointing to. So on the left here I've got pointing to a secret reference, and then on the right here I point it to a bare string. That will then be kind of classed as a change in spec for that component, and Dapr's gonna go ahead and reload that component. We can go into a bit more details on what that means in practice, but know that what's going to happen as the end result is Dapr is going to close the previous configuration or the previous component and bring up the new one, and without restarting Dapr. I've also have another example here of something which wouldn't cause a reload. So let's say we're running in Kubernetes this time, and perhaps you're annotating your components, maybe internally with your team to kind of keep things organized, or to label things, to track them in some other tools that you're using outside of Dapr. In the Dapr world, an annotation on a component doesn't actually change the specification of that component. So Dapr is going to drop that change as if it wasn't a change to the actual component spec itself. So you'll have a kind of no op from the Dapr perspective, even though the underlying resource has changed in Kubernetes. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Some notes on this feature. Like I said, it's in preview, so you need to opt into this feature. there may be some unforeseen behavior. It's obviously tested. I'm confident it works, but it's good, as we say, going to be a preview feature for at least 112. Some notes is the way that the kind of hot reloading or component dynamic reloading is working under the hood, is that what's going to happen when Dapr sees that a change has happened, it's going to gracefully shut down that component. That obviously means different things for different types of components. If it's a pub sub and we're doing some publishing, it's going to, reject any more publishers coming through and kind of delete that pub sub. If it's a state store, it'll be similar. And then once everything is closed down and the component has been declared internally as deleted or closed, it's then going to reinitialize that component with the new specification. So it's important to note that when the spec changes, you will have things like a small amount of downtime, of course, between when that component has closed and when it's been reinitialized with a new spec. Dapr isn't doing anything like spinning up the two components at the same time and then rolling over, things like that. It is a kind of direct close and then reopen. So you do have that window in between where you'll have where the component will be unavailable. Indeed, similarly, if the new component comes up with a bad spec, maybe the configuration itself is invalid or the host name is not quite right, the component can't initialize, Dapr is not going to be doing any rollback. So it's not going to try and do any magic or kind of help you in that way. It will do what you ask it to do. So do keep that in mind if you want to use this feature. Another small note as well, which may or may not be relevant for you if you're using Dapr in self-hosted mode. So the way that it's working in self-hosted mode is that Dapr is going to be using file notifications for whatever system you're running on. So kind of FS Notify or equivalents in Windows. Worth noting is that if you're using some kind of ZFS file system or something like that, typically those aren't supporting file system notifications. So you won't have immediate reconciliation when you make changes to your files. However, there is a kind of every 60 seconds, Dapr is going to re-reconcile everything anyway. So it will still work. It just won't be immediate. You'll have that kind of up to 60-second time before the kind of new configuration takes place. So I think those are the big kind of points. I will also say that we are currently supporting component types here, as well as HTTP endpoints. We're not currently tracked to support subscriptions or configurations, at least in 112. In future, that would obviously be something that we want to support as well. But it's just those component those types for the moment. So cool. I'll go on to a demo now. So I wanted to show kind of how this kind of hot reloading, component reloading is working in practice, both for self-hosted as well as on Kubernetes. So some kind of simple examples, but I hope it kind of conveys what you can kind of expect going on under the hood. So as you can see here, I've got a file here that's saved that Dapr is pointing to. It's called my component. In this case, it's an in-memory state store, pretty simple stuff. And I can show that I can write to this state store. Let's do kind of a simple curl. And let's see that one. You can see here that that was successful. And hopefully you can also see that I can read back what I just wrote. Maybe if I can do it curl very quickly. I believe I want to do that. Yes, great. So you can see that I wrote to the in-memory state store and I got my value back. Simple stuff. The exciting part is, what if I want to do like, change the name of this component, for example. So not my component, I suppose. If I save that, you can see that we've got some more log lines coming from Dapr over here. And what this is telling us is that it's noticed a change in our in the resources that we have that Dapr is pointing to. And the change that it's noticed, it says that, okay, my component no longer exists. Not my component now does exist. So what it's going to do is going to close my component. Once all the closing is done, it's then going to re-add all the new components. So that's what you'll see here at the bottom. So I can show that that's kind of working under the hood. If we write to the my component that we just did earlier, you can see that it doesn't work anymore, right? Because the component doesn't exist. However, if I change it to not my component, you can see that value did get written because that new component exists. Something you could also do is change the type of the component. For example, we could change this to a pub sub, for example, if that's something that you'd want to do. But this is just to kind of show that also works. So similarly, it's going to see that the component has changed types. So the kind of spec has changed. It's then going to delete and close the previous component and then bring it up again with the new configuration. And so we should see here, for example, if I try and curl, has that worked? I think that's worked. And then if I curl to the pub sub, I believe it's this one, 3500. Hold it, not my component. You can see that worked. Great. I also wanted to show it running in a Kubernetes context as well. So you can see here that I have a Kubernetes cluster running. Nothing too interesting. The only thing is that I have a kind of dummy app running here that has got, is enabled with Dapr. And I have some components in my default namespace. You can see I have my different component here loaded in as well as a pub sub. I'm also kind of following the logs here on the right, so you can see that the when the updates change. And so, like I was describing before, we can do a kubectl edit. So let's kind of bring up all the components. And just like before, we can make changes to these components. You can see them getting reflected on the right. So maybe we can change some metadata values here. I'll save this, and you'll notice that Dapr has re-reconciled all those components. And that behaves much the same as it does in self-hosted mode. Like I was mentioning before, things like annotations are not considered as changing the spec of a component. So you won't have that kind of reconciliation behavior happening, and you won't have any of the kind of drawbacks of the downtime that we were talking about before. See here that the update has been skipped because there's no changes being detected on that component, just the annotation was changed. Great. I think that's everything I wanted to demo today. Again, this is a preview feature. It's an opt-in, and it's pinned for 112. And indeed, again, it's just for components and HTTP endpoints for 112. But with that, I think I'll hand it back.
Awesome.
Let's see.
Thanks, Josh. That was a great demo. Let's see. Do we have any questions? I don't know if folks want to come off mute. I'm trying to catch up with chat here, so.
Yeah, so some immediate ones. I think Yaron has also replied to the question regarding rolling back. Yeah, that's certainly something up in the air. No hard decisions have been made about that yet. I think it becomes quite non-trivial, especially when you're thinking about different types of components and what it actually means to roll back. Does that make any sense in the context of the type of component? So yeah, it's definitely kind of up in the air. But at least today, we're doing the kind of base case, and it's very clear what the behavior is, what's going on. It's going to close and delete all the old stuff and then bring up the new.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I think this is a great feature. And regarding the small window of downtime, I think that's going to be a much smaller window than if you had to actually, like today, restart the entire pod or restart the entire deployment and just have, Kubernetes, for example, if you're running on it, you just tear down the pods and bring them back up. So definitely a lot less downtime for most systems. And we're also working to enable retriable status code so that when you call Dapr, Dapr will actually tell you if you've encountered an error that's retriable so that clients, like that's the case, for example, can retry it. And so that'll even further improve the downtime that you might be experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. I also saw another comment about what type of configuration changes. Everything that basically, everything you see in the metadata block or the type block, everything in there is pretty much ignored except the name. Everything else would be considered a change in configuration. So that's how that's working. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and one last question. Sorry, Nimal. Josh, I think on the reloading, right? The existing components which we shutting down gracefully. So I don't think the all the components that we support today have that graceful shutdown has been implemented, right? So how we are handling that?
Yeah. So that is some of the work we've been doing for the past few months. I'd say probably since about January or so. There's been quite a lot of effort done in the background to make sure that everything does shut down gracefully. You'll also notice today, not today, but in the version 1.12 release, that Dapr is also probably shutting down quicker as well. And that's because we have that graceful shutdown behavior in Dapr, and we're making sure that all of the resources are being released, go routines are being returned, servers are shutting down connections and gracefully shutting down with clients. So there is indeed been a lot of work happening for the past few months to kind of make this possible.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Great. Okay, so just in the interest of time, let's go ahead and move on to our next session, which will be CLI developer experience improvement for Kubernetes. Mukundan, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yeah, Neemane. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, sounds good. So, hello everyone. I'm Mukundan. I'm working on Dapr project from Microsoft. So, in this one, in a couple of previous releases, I think in 1.10, we released a multi-app run command in CLI, which helps developers to run multiple apps from a single Dapr template, a Dapr.yaml template, where you can specify multiple different apps and the components and so on. And then from there, you can basically run the apps using a single command like Dapr run -f and then point to the Dapr.yaml file. So with that, what's slated for 1.12 is an extension or an enhancement for this template to be run against a Kubernetes cluster in dev and test environments specifically. So what that does is based on the basically the goals are to basically add certain features wherein you have a flag that's being added, a --dev flag, to support creating Redis and Zipkin deployments in Kubernetes cluster in the default namespace, because this is specifically targeting dev and test environments. And similarly, the Dapr run -f command that is also going to be enhanced to support running multiple apps against Kubernetes cluster. And with that, you'll also have changes being done to Dapr stop and Dapr uninstall commands in this fashion, right? So with that, what's going to happen is let's go into a quick demo. So what I'm going to be showing is some changes to the quick starts, the tutorials pops up that you're going to have. So essentially, you're going to have a Redis component that's going to be there, and that's going to act as a PubSub broker. And then you're going to have a React form, and then that's going to publish data to Redis, and then you're going to have subscribers subscribing data from Redis, right? So with this, what we can do to run this locally is you can basically run multiple apps locally using this template. The container image and the create service, those are two different things that will only be added in 1.12 as part of the Kubernetes enhancements. But all the other things are some things that is already available. Like you can define the app port, you can define health callback checks and so on. So, and you can define the components and so on and so forth. So here, With this multi-app template, what you can do is you can basically run Dapr run -f, and then you can run this template. So what's going to happen is that it's going to start all the apps locally, and you're going to see the apps being started and then the logs being sent here. So this is a local run that you can see here. So in essence, when you point to localhost 8080, which is where the local React form is deployed. So like, for example, test local B, you send a message and you can see that from the node subscriber and the C subscriber, you're getting the message B, right? So, and you also see that the React form logs saying that you are publishing a message to that environment and the broker, right? So this is the local run that you can have. And similarly, one enhancement that I mentioned is initializing Dapr with basically Redis and Zipkin also. So you will basically run, I'm just pointing to a local build of the CLI. From there, you will just run init-k-dev, and that deploys the control plane, Dapr dashboard, and then it will deploy Redis and Zipkin. And then it will set the components that you will need for basic deployments. For example, state store, pub/sub, and Zipkin configurations. So that will be added as part of the default namespace, right? So that is one thing that you'll be seeing here. Like, you'll have an app config that's created as a default, and pub/sub, state store, those will be created as components here. So in here, what you can then do is you can then run uh, the same file with the changes that you can see in the file here, which is basically pointing to the container images that have been pre-built with whatever changes that you need. And if you need any service that you want to expose for a service, like for example, React form, you have a service that's being exposed. So you can basically set the service to be exposed as true. And otherwise, you can just set the container image field here, pointing to the container image that needs to be used. And you can just run Dapr run -f, point to the file, and then -k flag, which basically starts the deployment to Kubernetes. So in essence, you'll be seeing a deployment YAML and a service YAML file that's being deployed to Kubernetes. And from there, the logs are also streamed to the console here, right? So again, listening on port 8080, that is, the container is listening on port 8080. So we would need to port forward to that service. And by default, the service is on port 80 in Kubernetes. So if you see k-get service, you'll see that the React form has a load balancer, which is pointing to 80, right? So in essence, what we can do is we can do a port forward and point forward any 8000 port to 80 port. And from there, what you can do is you can then run the same, the localhost 8000 port, and you will get the React app, the same React app here. And then you can basically say like test remote message OB and so on. You can basically send the different messages, and from there you will see that you're also getting the logs updated here in the local console directly, right? So this is basically your having Kubernetes deployments, basic Kubernetes deployments being done triggered through the deployment YAML directly. So for example, this one, if you see here, you can go and see inside the .dapr folder that's being created. You'll see the logs for both the local run. This is the local run that's happened. And this is the Kubernetes deployment that's happened. You'll see the logs for both app and Dapr. And similarly, you'll see a deploy folder, which will contain both the deployment YAML with the annotations that is needed for Dapr, any environment variables that are defined, or any environment variables that are basically injected. And if there is a service deployment, you'll have the basic service deployment file also that's set here. So this is the basic run that's done here. And again, if you want to terminate, you can just exit this process, or you can run Dapr stop -f and point to the same file, and that will basically stop the Kubernetes deployments as well. So that is the update that's been done for Kubernetes. So are there any questions or comments?
Let's see, let me check chat. So we do have one question from Oli. He's asking, is it in scope to be able to specify which Kubernetes namespace and apps and components are deployed into on an app-by-app
Yes.
basis? Okay.
Yeah. So as of right now, just Paul just replied to that comment, but as in the reply, right now it is currently only default. We would basically like to have the feedback from the community based on whether a custom namespace is required or not, and so on. This feature is targeting dev and test environments, and that is why we felt that default namespace is something that we can use. But again, based on the community feedback, this can be added again. The namespace can be changed if needed. Yep.
No, that's
So,
cool.
yeah.
I just asked because in my particular use case of Dapr, we've got a multi-tenant cluster where developers launch an entire copy of their app into a multi-tenant cluster, and we separate out by namespace. So it would be, that's why I'm asking, so it'd be kind of neat to be able to maintain that same pattern using this tooling to launch straight into a specific namespace for each developer. That's the feedback there, I guess.
Okay. One more question that's there is whether deployment YAML and service YAML file generated from the tool, or are they prerequisite? They are generated from the tool. So based on what is available in the multi-app run template, the service.yaml and deployment.yaml will change. So in here, if you have multiple other fields, like for example, if you set the app health check callback and so on, or if you set the HTTP max street size, all those parameters that you can set already, that will also change the deployment .yaml and the service.yaml files, and it will be generated per run specifically.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything else in chat. Okay.
Yep.
In that case, I guess we will go on to our next presenter. Thanks, Mukundan. Next up, we have Oli, who will be demoing local debugging with Dapr using Docker Compose. Oli, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see my desktop?
We're not looking at your desktop, actually. We're just looking at your video. There we go. Now we can see.
Cool. Excellent. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Oli, Dapr adopter, community member. And yeah, I just wanted to give a real quick 5 minutes show and tell on something I've just spun together. So I guess monitoring the Discord forums, you see it pretty common, people asking, how can I debug a Dapperized app when it's part of a bigger, ecosystem of apps? And it's quite a philosophical question, which I'm sure everyone's hit at some point. Do you run the whole thing locally? Do you, like a monolith, or do you use like local tunnel debugging, like with Bridge to Kubernetes or IntelliJ ambassadors and telepresence, or which are quite heavyweight, or if you're comfortable with using Docker Compose, how would you do that with Compose? Well, I know that you can kind of build your binary straight into a volume that Docker containers mounted and do all kinds of clever trickery there, but that's just a step too far for a simple person like me to get my head around. So I search for things that are a bit easier to grok. So yeah, I wanted to quickly show you like how you would take a Docker Compose file that's got a couple of Dapperized apps in it, like you see. So one app called client, one app called workflow, the Dapr sidecars for those two apps, and a Redis pub/sub component and a Redis state component. And how would you isolate the workflow app, for example, so that it was running as part of your IDE? So you wanted to debug something, and you didn't want to run everything else kind of manually through a debugger as like a monolith kind of setup. You just wanted to use a Docker Compose as is, but then kind of intercept what's going on for the workflow app itself. So very similar to local tunnel debugging with Bridge to Kubernetes, but from a Docker Compose basis. So there was a feature that came out in 1.11 called an argument onto the CLI called app channel address, and this allows you to do this pretty simply. It allows the Dapr sidecar to break out of where it's expecting the app channel to be hosted in a Docker Compose network. Localhost isn't your host network, so if you're trying to run the app channel on your host environment through your debugger, it's not going to resolve it. So by setting that to docker.internal, you can resolve your web server that's been spun up through your IDE of choice. So let's just do a normal Docker Compose up. Take a couple of seconds to get running. Here you can see my Docker Compose file all running. Workflow app, workflow sidecar all running. Just going to start a workflow. So this is a Dapr workflow hitting the client app, which then forwards on a request onto the workflow app. And you can see the logs coming in here now from the workflow app. This is in Docker. This is in Docker Compose, so none of it's running through my ID right now. And you can see the notifications there coming in that the workflow is running, and that'll complete shortly. So I'm going to let that run, and then we'll swap over to a debug Docker Compose profile for that particular workflow app. So I'm not going to run Docker Compose up. I'm going to run Docker Compose -f compose.yaml, which is my base Docker image. And then I'm going to augment that with a debug YAML and run that. So we'll jump back over to the Docker. You'll still see the workflow app there, but it's kind of orphaned. It's still running, but it's been removed from the Docker network, and it's been stripped of its ports. So it's kind of there, but it's not attached to anything. Which now leaves me able to run my workflow app through VS Code. Workflow established. Now, if I run the same thing to start a workflow, you'll see notifications now coming in through my locally debugged app. And just to prove that, I'll drop a breakpoint on that activity. There you go. Breakpoint's been hit. Hit again. So yeah, we've now intercepted just the app. The sidecar's still running in Compose, but just the app channel is established locally. And really, it's just a bit of Docker Compose trickery to kind of repoint that workflow sidecar to the new app channel address on host.docker internal to expose it to my local IDE. and then do a little bit of trickery with the networking to strip the old the base workflow app out of the network and remove its ports so that they can be reallocated in the proper way. So that's it, really. Just a few little tweaks, and it works. Pretty simple if you're a Docker Compose user. Pretty easy to get your head around. Yeah, one of many ways to debug locally. Hope that was useful. Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Any questions?
Awesome. Let's look at chat to see if we can see any questions. Mark is asking when you'll write the blog post, Oli. I'm also curious.
Yeah, I could do a blog post if you want. It's fine. But yeah, the code's all on my repo, so I can easy enough to share around and whatnot. But yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in chat. So I think we are okay to. Oh yeah, we do have some requests to share the code repo. So
Yeah, no problem.
awesome. Okay, so I think we're okay to move on to our next session, which will be our community show and tell. Mark, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Yes, I'll start sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so let's have a look at what the community has been doing for the past 2 weeks. Let's start off with some blog posts. Instead of just reading this list here, I actually opened them. So the first one is called Exploring MQTT Bindings with Dapr in .NET 6 and Azure Container Apps. Pretty self-explanatory by Pravas Inamdar. Definitely a nice read about the MQTT binding. I haven't used it myself yet, so I'll definitely explore this a bit further soon. The next one is a bit of a more high-level article by Koshi, Navigating the Distributed Landscape, Top 10 Strategies for Scalable Systems. So it's more about microservices in general and event-driven architectures. But he mentions Dapr quite a bit in this top 10. Next one is more like an introductory article by Muhammad Junaid. That covers all of the building blocks and the concept around Dapr, and he mentions that this will be part of a series, so I'm looking forward to that. Then the final blog post by Will Velida, Implementing Dapr PubSub functionality in ASP.NET Core Web APIs. This one is actually based on an Azure Service Bus. It's a good thorough article, a good sample code in there, so you can just copy this yourself quite easily. Then let's have a look at the social media post. So this is one from I am CodeQS. I think it's a kind of a IT news aggregator thing. Points to a bit of an introductory article about Dapr. It actually ends with a YouTube video that's actually a sort of embedded video of the CNCF video that Kendall recently made about Dapr. Then Mark has been interviewed by the News Stack. So this is quite a nice video interview about Dapr and also what Duiker is doing. Then I was a guest on the On Air in the Cloud podcast a couple of weeks ago. Also mentioned everything about Dapr, of course. Then the ABP conference was a couple of weeks ago. Cecile did a session there on Dapr workflows, but now all of the videos are online, so now you can actually rewatch these sessions. So definitely have a look at his video. Then this person is building something. I'm not exactly 100% sure what it is yet. It's some kind of an industry accelerator tool to easily build all kinds of, I think, business solutions. It's got this interesting visual editor and also some business processing tools in there, but it's actually using Dapr for all of the communication that's going on. So it's very, very early stage, this thing. They're developing it in open source. So yeah, give it a look. Then on LinkedIn, EPAM Mexico was mentioning that they had a tech talk around Java, Spring Boot, and Dapr, which was apparently quite successful. So it's always nice to see some people coming together and learning about Dapr in a group. Then again, another post about Will, because he's doing a workshop at the Cloud Native Summit in Australia. I announced that I'll be speaking about Dapr on a lot of conferences later this year, NEC Porto, Sweattalk, and the KubeCon we don't know yet, definitely sponsoring there, but not sure if we'll be speaking there, but I'll also be at Build Stuff and at Cloud Brew. And this is actually a final call for action for everyone that's watching now, because I think this State of Dapr survey will be open just for one more day. So if you haven't filled in yet, please do that now. And as always, yeah, please have a look at the Dapr Discord. And if you have something to show, or maybe you find another article, please put it in the show and tell. It makes my life a lot easier, and it's a very nice way to share a bit of knowledge on Discord. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing everything that's been going on in the Dapr community. Let's see if there's any questions. There's nothing questions on that. So I think we are good to just open things up for open discussion in general. Are there any questions about anything we've discussed today or anything going on in the Dapr community that folks want to talk about?
I'll just quickly update that we are pushing the release by 1 week. That's a decision we made this morning. So we have our new dates updated on the GitHub tracking issue for 1.12. So if you want to find out about the new dates and find out when Dapr is going to be released, you can go there. But it looks like it's going to be mid-end of September at this point, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, looks like it's end of September.
Yeah,
I can go ahead and share that for folks as well, the tracking issue, so you guys can keep up to date with any changes to the release date. Okay, any other discussion points or things that people want to talk about? Okay, in that case, I guess we'll go ahead and end this call. Thanks everyone for joining.